It's time for another edition of PRosé with Vikki, Locke, and Cyndee Woolley from C2 Communications.
Hi, everybody. We're back. It's PRosé, a couple of PR pros talking about literature, prose, books that we love, with fabulous authors, as always, while sipping our favorite beverages. And welcome back to my partner, Cyndee, who was out last week when we had Kristen Harmel as our special guest. How are you doing?
You know, it's been a challenging week for me and my family. We lost my brother unexpectedly to a heart attack, but you know, out of those moments come some of the sweet stories that you didn't know about people, and so it's really nice. Some of his friends have come out and we've connected, and I've heard some really just sweet anecdotes about how he helped them out, and it's just a nice way to remember my brother. But we're planning a memorial service and a celebration of life, and it was super important that we have steak, sushi, and sake, three of his favorite things. And we're going to be working on a memorial tribute at Shy Wolf Sanctuary. So if anyone's listening, Shy Wolf Sanctuary is one of our favorite charities in Naples, Florida. And they rescue wolf dogs and wolves that have been abandoned. And they give them a home, and they care about them, and they do so many wonderful things. And my brother was a big rescuer of animals, so we just felt like what a great place to always have a memory. So yeah, they're working on their new sanctuary. So I encourage everyone to look up shywolfsanctuary.org. But right now, I'm going to give a little toast to my brother. Cheers, you big lug. This is a little bit of sake in a sake glass from Japan. So,
ooh, Japan.
Yes. My sister and her husband were in the military. My brother-in-law was in the military, and my military family traveled around a lot. So I used to ask for interesting shot glasses, and I got this beauty one year, which I love.
Nice. Very nice.
So it's my mom is probably watching. My sister is here in spirit. My brother is here in spirit, and I'm sure my dad is as well. So cheers.
Well, I don't have a sake glass from Japan, but I have something special, and I'm going to get you one. This might cheer you up a little bit. Look at this. It's called Bubbles and Bling. It's got over 800 rhinestones on it, not dishwasher safe. And it keeps your bubbles or your wine icy cold.
You and sparkly things.
Isn't it fabulous? I got this in the mail today from my friend Myra McElhaney, and she says that our friend Wendy Bapshin is selling them at the Mart. If you're in Atlanta, you can order it from her. And this is pretty fantastic, and this is to your brother as well. I'm drinking to him.
Cheers. That sounds fantastic.
And one more thing, since you spent so much time in New York, were you able to see any shows whatsoever before we get to our guest? I just wanted to find out, is New York still pretty closed, or?
You know, I will say that New York is still very quiet, right? There's, you know, some outdoor stuff going on, but I was like, there's got to be a show. And I found this app, and it's called Gold Star. So here's our bubbly, blingy stuff, Gold Star. And it had so many events on it, and it had plays and Shakespeare in the Park and a comedian. And so it was fantastic. Anyway, we found a show called Metamorphosis, and it's this contemporary dance solo, and it's 60 minutes of this woman just pouring her heart out on the stage through dance and these transitions in life and things that she went through growing up as she composed this. But like, it was so appropriate for COVID and how everyone's recovering from COVID that, you know, it didn't matter what your story was. You connected with this building and the emotion and these dresses that she wore. Her name was Maria Caruso, Maria Caruso. And she was fantastic because she stayed afterwards and talked to my daughter, and who's an aspiring dancer. If anyone doesn't know, she's an aspiring ballerina. And so Maria just spent like half an hour talking to my daughter. It was so fantastic. Then she's like, I have another show that you have to come to. And I said, what else could be going on, right? So she invited us to see Rear View Mirror. And it's a ballet contemporary program to 80s music with full-on like Jane Fonda leotards.
How fun.
Oh my God, it's hilarious. And the dancers were so phenomenal, and just diversity in body types and male and female, and they were gorgeous. And it was just such a fun evening. So definitely made some special memories.
So I think Broadway's supposed to be back in September, right? If this Delta variant doesn't blow up like it seems to be doing right now. And an interesting fact I read today, that since we're still kind of in that quarantine mode, 38% of Americans who work from home work from their bed. Have you ever done that?
Yeah.
You have?
I know you have to. Don't act like you haven't.
I have not. They say most people that are working from their beds are accountants, engineers, and realtors.
It's a laptop, baby. It's a laptop. It goes anywhere.
And speaking, as we continue talking about the quarantine baking, bread baking, that was a thing. It's still a thing. I know it was a thing for me during my downtime, my lockdown. I made banana bread, I made zucchini bread, I made sourdough bread, and I made peanut butter bread.
Oh my God, peanut butter bread.
Yes, it was delicious and very easy. And many of us did a lot of stress baking. I remember that was a huge hashtag, stress baking, in 2020. And we went from gluten-free to everybody's a baker. One of my favorite lines from The Devil Wears Prada is Emily Blunt's character, where she's yelling at Anne Hathaway's character, Andy, and saying, "You eat carbs, for Christ's sake." It's just like a horrible thing. And now it's not anymore. And I say all that because our guest today is Jennifer Lapidus. She's the founder of Carolina Ground Flour Mill in Asheville, North Carolina. She's a baker, she's a miller, and she's an author. And she's got a new book that's called Southern Ground. And in our opinion, Jennifer, you are the gold medal winner of freshly milled flours made from regionally grown grains. She's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, Taste of the South, and in today's Atlanta Journal and Constitution. Welcome, Jennifer, to PRosé.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I too have this is actually a rosé from France. It's a natural wine. I've been doing this Dry Ridge Farm, I think that's what it's called. It's like a curated natural wines thing. And so you sign up and they send you bottles. And anyways, so I was like, this is a opportunity to open a bottle. So
good. Oh, thank you.
Right.
Nice.
So it's not very pink, but it is a rosé. So.
Yes. Cheers to all of us. So why don't you tell us a little bit how a girl who was born in Miami, went to the University of Georgia, thought about going to law school, or actually in law school, became a baker and a miller?
Right. I didn't actually go to law school. I was studying for the LSATs and sort of stepped off that path. So grew up in the 1970s and 80s in Miami, which was a great time to be there, but also anything but grounded in nature, or it was a very I mean, the 70s were very different than the 80s in Miami, which was just like Miami Vice was just like the pulse of the place. It felt like I don't regret coming from Miami at all. There's nowhere else I can think of to compare to. But I think in a way it pushed me in a direction of seeking authenticity, because I mean, now I go down there and I love it because it's forever home, and I'm 52 now, and we take information in a different way. There, it's like I love that experience of being in an air-conditioned space and walking out into the humidity and relaxed vibe of Miami. But as a teenager of angst and all of that, I saw a lot of materialism and was just seeking a more authentic experience. And I was, like kind of forever driven by this sort of not so much what am I going to be when I grow up, but more what is the impact I can make, or the reality of the existence that I will, the roots that I'm making. I mean, I think of it now that I was because I have a 26-year-old daughter who's trying to navigate the world. And, it's an interesting thing to kind of reflect back on what are the things that pushed us into the world and pushed us, maybe for me, away from the world I came from. So my great grandfather was a metal worker, right? I mean, an immigrant, but my grandfather was an architect of hotels like the Fontainebleau and the Eden Rock and things that were so not, I mean, it was about the experience and how you feel. And so anyways, and I ended up sort of being driven by this idea of a real loaf of bread, because back in the 80s or early 90s, I mean, there was really, trying to find a loaf of naturally leavened bread, it wasn't even a question, right? I mean, I started baking bread because I wanted to learn how to do things with my hands. My parents are both professionals. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was an architect. It was like, I just suddenly wanted to learn how to do something with my hands. But my mom did always cook in the house, and she had her James Beard, her Beard on Bread, and so gave me that cookbook, and I'm trying to make bread, and I'm wondering what these rapid rise yeast packets are about. I was a history major in college. So, and as a history major in college, I was really interested in the Industrial Revolution. I was really intrigued by that intersect, because I did see sort of what I experienced in Miami, which, South Miami had the Wholesome Bread Factory in the center of it when I was growing up, and everybody smelled that scent of fresh bread, and it was very comforting, right?
Yeah.
Even coming out of a factory, who doesn't love the smell of bread? And eventually the factory went away, and there was a place called the Bakery Center that came in. We loved it. It was like art galleries, and there's a gym, and there's some shops and a sushi restaurant, and it didn't work. So that went away. And then there was like this mall that's there now, which like you go in and there's like these fake little sidewalks, and there's shops, and there's, and it's, I think I can't remember what it's called, but regardless, it was like a town within a town trying to create an experience, right? And I think that when I hit that piece of the Industrial Revolution as a history major, I was really intrigued by the reaction in the arts, and both in writing and in painting and in music, to the Industrial Revolution. And so, the social shift, and it hit me again when I started baking bread, because I felt like bread was this connection point. It witnessed the changes. It was always there, right? I mean, we've been eating bread. Grain is the first. Growing grain was what made civilization. We went from hunter-gatherers to then gardening, and grain was a huge piece of that. I mean, you can find anthropological digs that have just rocks that were used to pound grain into flour. So for me, taking this really unexpected, I'm supposed to go to law school, and I'm like digging into this Industrial Revolution piece, and then start to bake bread, and I'm remembering that piece, and then I'm like looking at these rapid rise yeast packets, and I want to understand where this came from, what came before rapid rise yeast. And so very early on, in the early 90s, I found my way. I found an apprenticeship. And because I was driven, I was like on the path for law school, but had all these questions. And I found a window, a door into this world that I was so excited about. I found a couple of apprenticeships about, that were naturally leavened bread. And I just like threw the law school aside, just kept going, didn't think about, whatever,
How did that go over with your parents? If your mom was not,
my dad was a lawyer, and he really thought that law would be a good fit for me. And he's right. Like, after he passed away, I understood I am an analytical thinker. And and like him, I'm very driven by what's right and just in the world, not just peace, but peace with justice. But that type of thinking did serve me later on when I was writing grant proposals, because it's the same kind of mind, which initially grant proposals are what funded this effort to rebuild a regional grains system, launch a flour mill, all of that. But that's like, 20 years later or 15 years later. So anyways, I want to give you a really simple answer, and I'm just like, come down this rabbit hole with me. Let me tell you. But yeah, so I went in this direction. They did think it was a bit odd, but then, one of the things that really impressed them is I ended up starting this little cottage bakery, wood-fired oven bakery. I was milling my own flour. I was doing this, after my apprenticeships. And I was making this naturally leavened bread. And I ended up settling in Western North Carolina, and they have a cabin in Western North Carolina. And the woman who, one of the owners of Joe's Stone Crabs, Joe's Stone Crabs, yeah, it's like super famous. And my bread was ending up in Burnsville, and she was a fan of it. And so that was like, what is Jen doing? that was definitely the beginning of my parents understanding that I was doing something that was that affected people, because I felt like people react to food and flavor and texture. It's like the pace of life. We're all like now we're all like checking our phones, or whatever it is that drives us, but there's something about food that slows us down. And especially when it's flavorful or unexpected. And so, and I
just add Jessica's comment up here. My grandma and I used to make it together, zucchini bread. It brings back all of these memories. I can remember making sourdough bread with my grandma in Colorado, where she had the whole starter in the pantry, like nice. this real sour starter that had probably been 20 years old.
That's amazing. Yeah, you don't hear a lot of those stories.
Well, none of us really heard. It sounds like, today going to a farmer's market I just did yesterday here in Florida, but it sounds like you were into that, or wished there were farmers markets, or maybe you had your own back in the 80s.
Well, not in the 80s, but in the early 90s when I was baking, I did sell at farmers market, and there was about 4 of us, and we were literally like the freaks in the parking lot. Like, don't make eye contact with those people that are peddling their bread and produce. It is so exciting to see how it's hard to find parking at market these days. And I love it. I love that and we realized it in 2008 during the economic crisis, buying local, the idea of supporting our local farmers, it was recession proof. And so in 2008 was, the idea for this flour mill came out of the economic crisis, because the price of wheat, there was a rush on commodities. The price of wheat spiked as much as 130%, which is not an easy thing for a baker. The margins are not big there. And it was a very profound moment for myself and other bakers in my community to realize how disconnected we were from the people that grew our most essential ingredient. So writing a grant proposal, it was pretty clear, look, we can see that this interest in local is recession proof, that people are still going to support their farmers, are still going to try and, support what's in their community. And so the idea of reviving a regional mill, a community mill, really, I think, hit at an emotional place for a lot of people. And
let me show them this mill, because this is so cool. And when Jennifer joined us, I was like, I love this picture. It looks so 1970s Jackie O, but not a pin top hat, just like this very classic and hearty, and it's so beautiful to me to see the architecture of this. What are we looking at here with green?
So with the mill,
with the mill, yeah.
So that our mill, we're actually about to add a second mill to our lineup, but this is built in Austria. It's a Stoneberg grist mill, so our stones are pretty big, 48 inches in diameter. And what's above it is our pneumatic system that allows us to pull grain up into it and drop it down into the hopper. The stones are within that. You have two stones. One of them is a bed stone, so it sits just still, and the other one is the runner stone that's spinning. And then when we mill, we have temperature gauges on every outlet, so we make sure that our temperatures stay below 100 degrees. And then what you don't see on the other side of this is a bolter or a sifter, so we can create not just a whole grain flour, but also a range of sifted products. So and this is different than the way that most flour, if you go to the grocery store, I mean, 99.9% of the flour on the shelf is industrially produced. It's an industrial roller mill, which separates the bran from the germ and the endosperm. The endosperm is that starchy white. And if you take out the oily germ, it's very shelf life. But you take out the oily germ, you're also taking out a lot of the flavor and nutrients and so when we, along with the idea of regional milling, was let's bring back the stone milling, because we're not as concerned with shelf life, right? I mean, when you're selling directly to bakeries or you're selling directly to customers, retail customers, they have the benefit of getting this fresh, flavor-forward flour, which is really exciting, because it does inspire recipes. It inspires how you interact with this flour, like what in the book Southern Ground, when we, the first third is a lot of narrative, a lot of story, but the other 2/3 are recipes, and they're divided into the flour that is used, so you can really see the flavor accompaniments, the spices or whatnot, especially with the non-bread recipes, from whole grain to highly sifted. What pairs well with these different flours in terms of flavor, and sort of amplifies whatever your grandma's zucchini bread, I mean, it's just going to change it in a way that I think is really, it's exciting. It's, again,
so if you did a taste test, would you be able to tell?
Yes.
You would? Okay.
You would. And for me, one of my best compliments was I was at the table, the dinner table a couple weeks ago, and my daughter and my stepdaughter were at the table, and my daughter had mentioned that her dad's girlfriend had given her a cookie, and she was like, it was just sort of really sweet, and after I've had your baked goods for so long, like, I wasn't interested in it, and I just all I could taste was the sweetness. And then Emma, my stepdaughter, chimed in, yeah, like, I no longer want just, because what happens when you take, and even if it's highly sifted, but you take a stone ground flour that's sifted, and from whole grain to sifted, but sifted where you maybe have gotten rid of the bran, but you still have that oily germ, and flavor it creates, even if it's the same amount of sugar, it creates a more complex flavored whatever it is you're making. And it's no longer like kind of you don't realize it until you have it, like no longer one note, but kind of a multi-tone, various shades. There's just a lot going on in the flavor. I mean, this is like, why do we do coffee tastings or wine tastings or chocolate? I would argue that grain is the next thing, flour is the next thing, with this regional grains movement of like, let's really do some tastings and some pairings and compare experience.
Are you milling? Are you milling more than wheat? I'm
Yeah.
free, and I just like
Oh.
as much as I wish I could have like my grandma's sourdough bread. It doesn't
Right.
work anymore.
Are you celiac, or are you just sensitive?
It's an intolerance, and
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I don't mean to downplay it. If it's not celiac, I just mean, is it celiac or is it an intolerance? I mean, we mill a lot of, I personally am a big rye eater. And so we do a lot of Renz Abruzzi rye. There's in Southern Ground, which I happen to have right here. There is 11 rye bread recipes. There's 13 rye forward non-bread recipes, but rye, they have found is, I mean, at least for me, who I definitely, I will eat gluten, but I am best with, it's not that there's not gluten in rye, but it is a different type of gluten. And so a lot of people who have sensitivities to a wheat gluten can take rye. And there's just unexpected applications like chocolate cake made with rye flour, or in Southern Ground, there's I mean, we have rye shortbreads, but the Levy Baking Company, they have, it's a lovely recipe in the book for this vegan olive oil chocolate rye cookie, which sounds, I'm not making it sound so good. It is lovely. And actually this hand pie that in the picture on the far right, that's a chocolate rye hand pie. So.
Well, see, my daughter's vegan, which makes me 95% vegan. I
hear you.
You know, and
although she's suffering with the School of the Arts, which is like, I love their cafeteria is not so great. It's a vegan double chocolate cookie with rye and olive oil is what it's called.
Oh, that sounds lovely. But we've found that if you call anything vegan, people go, and some of the best food. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It is so hot in London right now. I mean, vegan or plant-based. I was there before the pandemic. My daughter went to university there, and I was so excited to see. Yeah, I think that it's, I mean, I'm not 100% vegan, but I really appreciate, I appreciate it. But
there's nothing like a good steak. Come on, Jennifer.
I will eat a steak too. And I'm sort of, I don't want to say no to any particular, you know, I like to keep my options open, but I have been very impressed by what, there's a restaurant in Asheville called Plant, and we just went because it was like initially where it was located for like some event. And then it was like, they're doing an incredible job, not because it's vegan, but because they're interacting with food and ingredients in a way that is really inspiring. And I think that is really where it comes down to, you know, yes, to a good steak, but also yes to, you know, in Southern Ground, I have a cardamom tea cakes, and they're made with whole wheat pastry flour. Before I started this mill, I would never have wanted to do any kind of cookie with whole wheat pastry flour. It sounded really 1970s to me, right? But the quality of the flour, the idea of marrying a whole grain stone ground flour with a warming spice like cardamom, it just works. So I think at the end of the day, you know, instead of all of the little silos we want to hang out in, I'm like, one big one, but let's really be driven by, I don't know, flavor, texture, innovative approaches to these things. And so
I
well, we just got a couple of minutes left. Why don't you tell everybody how they can get your book?
How they can get my book. I would say, you know, in general, support your local bookstore, independent bookstore, but it's 10 Speed is our publisher. It is available through Amazon, through Target, any of your local, any of your booksellers, or on our website, carolinaground.com. We actually sell it. If you want to get a signed copy by me, you can order flour and the book through carolinaground.com.
Fantastic. And next week we're going international, Cyndee.
We are. We're
going. Yes, we have. I don't know if you've heard of Annette Joseph. Her
Yeah,
book
from Italy.
Yes, she's going to be doing the show from Italy. It'll be 10:30 her time, but she said she didn't care. So she'll be in Italy talking about her cookbook, and of course the book Italy is My Boyfriend. And I follow her on social media, and I just love her. Have you been to her place in Italy?
My sister has, but I have had dinner with Annette, and I have.
Oh my gosh! Okay,
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah.
So are the grains different there in Italy than they are here?
Our Renz Abruzzi rye comes from the Abruzzi region of Italy, but it came into this country, in the 1600s or something. So, I mean, it's a heritage grain. So, and it's interesting because, where I am in the Western North Carolina region, there is a parallel between the land and what can be produced in that area. So, but I love Italy.
I do too.
Yeah.
Well,
who doesn't love Italy, right?
Yes.
Fun fact: my grandfather's family, we went back on heritage, and they brought red wheat to the United States, which I believe is used for beer. So cheers.
Yeah, red wheat is when did they come over and from where?
It came through Russia and
the turkey red wheat. The turkey red wheat. They're from the Ukraine in the late 1800s, which was like a huge point in history because they started growing that so well in the Midwest, in through Canada and down into the upper Midwest and town. It was basically what pushed forward the industrialization of bread wheat production, but also because the wheat was red, and so when they would sift it, it was still dark. That was what really pushed forward the industry of like industrial roller mills. But on the other side of the coin, it's also been a grain that has been one of the first to be reintroduced in the regional, a heritage grain reintroduced during this regional grains movement. So it's got a really rich history. That's fascinating.
So
who knew?
Who knew?
What connections? It's a small world.
Yes. Jennifer, thanks so much for being on PRosé with us. You have a great evening, and we'll see you all next Tuesday at 4:30. Thanks for being with us. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Join us next week for another edition of PRosé with Vikki, Locke, and Cyndee Woolley from C2 Communications.